podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, one of the world's leading international professional bodies, advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. I'm your host, Helena Clayton, and in this 6-part series, we're exploring love in coaching. With 25 years of working in leadership and organisational development, for the last 8 years, I've been researching, writing about, and running leadership programs and workshops exploring the role of love in leadership, in work, and beyond. And for this series, I brought together 6 amazing coaches as my guests, all of whom are strong advocates and pioneers in what they do, and how they think about and integrate love into their coaching. 3 of them are writing books about love. 1 has just submitted their master's thesis about love, and another talks so boldly about love to their international and very senior leadership audiences that it takes my breath away. So thank you for being here and for bringing your curiosity to this thought-provoking series at a time when the world needs love more than ever. So welcome Marie Quigley, who I'm delighted to be talking with today. And I was introduced to Marie by Claire Norman, another deeply seasoned and experienced coach and coach mentor who will also be talking with me on this podcast. So hello, Marie. Welcome.
Hello, Helena. And it's lovely to see you again. What a lovely connection call we had a few weeks ago through Claire. I've been obviously reading about your work, about love and leadership and coaching, and it's been a pleasure to meet you in person as well.
Really, I'm looking forward to this conversation. Let me begin by saying, can you tell the folks listening who you are, what you do, and how you came to be exploring love as part of that?
It's always a challenging question to answer. I think we play so many roles in our lives. I'm a partner, a wife, and I've got 3 kids, and I've spent the past 30 years traveling the world with my wonderful work as a coach, and I've trained coaches for the past 15 years, as well as my work in executive coaching. I'm a coach supervisor and mentor as well. And how I came to be looking at love in coaching, I was doing a coaching demonstration to support the competencies for Master Certified Coaching. And during this demonstration at the end, one of the coaches said, "How do you manage to challenge so fiercely and at the same time hold this compassionate space?" And I thought, that's such a great question. And it was actually the catalyst for what started me to go back to my reflective diaries over the past 20 years that I've been keeping and think about how that's evolved for me to be able to provoke and challenge in a loving and caring way, but still raise the bar so that I'm not just being a supporter for someone, but I am providing this loving, challenging space with humour, with connection, to support people to think about different perspectives and different ways of being. So that question that coach asked me was the catalyst for me to start looking deeper into actually how do I do this and what's the journey been for me? Because it hasn't always been like that, Helena. When I trained as a coach, I'm a good girl, I'm a pleaser. That's one of my patterns of behaviour that has served me, but also not served me. And one of the things that happened to me after training as a professional coach was I thought I had to be a good girl and leave some of the parts of me out, especially in executive coaching, and bring that tough, kick-ass type approach. And I very soon realised actually it was very depleting for me and my clients weren't getting the best. So that's how it all happened, that I looked at this concept of the book that I'm writing. Is the working title is Fierce Love. And that's how it all started, really.
Thank you. And I definitely hope we can get to talk a bit about what you're thinking, how your thinking is evolving as you're writing that book, because that will be gold, I think, for us and for people listening. Something about the polarity or the tension or the both and within coaching of how do we do a great job of high support and how do we do a great job of high challenge? And how are the two not mutually exclusive? How can they be contained, arguably within the concept of love, right? How can it be loving to be both high challenge and high support?
I think both are required. For me, I can't do one without the other. There was such a gap in my work because the only high challenge was super focused on action. And there was this whole part about the human that was missing. And I could sense it in my client work, but I could also sense it in my own response to my work.
So I wonder if I can make our first proper question, not necessarily about love, but more about the field of coaching, your coaching practice. We read a lot, we hear a lot now about how the field of coaching is changing, moving away from perhaps a focus on performance and becoming much wider, much deeper, arguably. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing in your practice in terms of what people are bringing, in terms of what's required of us as coaches these days, and how is it changing and evolving in your experience?
I've been thinking about that because it's one of the questions I've been thinking about in writing the book. And I do believe, Helena, that 20 years ago, when I was doing performance coaching, there was still a call for the being of coaching. And when I embodied being braver in my work, even 20 years ago, the questions that my clients were bringing became deeper. So it has evolved because the world is a little bit more complicated, a little bit more fear-filled. And so I'm noticing that in the type of reflections that my executives are bringing to their work. It's not just about the system within the organization that they're thinking about. It's the wider system of the world. And a lot of my work happens in the Middle East. And with the many things that are happening around the world and the horrors that people are experiencing, there's new questions that are being brought to light about the type of leadership that the world is showing and how that ripple effect is or isn't coming down to organizations and teams and those individual leaders. So that's interesting.
So more fear, a call for more being in coaching, people wanting to go deeper and wider, right? Thinking of their place and their leadership and leadership in the wider world. What does that invite in? I'm thinking particularly in respect of love, but what does that invite in then from us as coaches? Where do we need to be or flow or move to work well with those emerging themes?
I always think, and I didn't quote this, but somebody else did, I believe that contracting is the work. And if we want to do brave things in our coaching practice and our clients want to do brave things, then we really have to contract for a different approach to how we have conversations with each other. So if we want to invite love into the conversation, if we want to invite bravery and courage and daring into the conversation, it needs to be contracted for so that the expectations are clear that we are going to go on a more vertical development, that it's going to be deeper and wider, and also perhaps more emotive. A lot of my work involves looking at emotions and finding out what the body says, not just what the mind says in leadership. And of course, newer leaders who might come to me, they may think this just is a little bit unusual. So brave conversations start with understanding what's my role, what's your role, how do we develop conversations that touch on the edge of things and maybe go across the edge into something that is even more challenging than we ever thought, because we never know when we do brave conversations how far we can go. So there's also that psychological safety of, if we go too far, how will you let me know? A lot of it begins with contracting for me.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a time years ago when I thought I was a pretty experienced coach, and then I went on a piece of coaching development work, and we began with contracting, and we spent so long there. And initially I was a bit huffy about, oh, come on, I'm more advanced than this. And then I came to a deeply humble place of thinking, no, this is the beginning and ending of so much really solid coaching. Yeah, I'm with you. And I'm thinking that as coaching is evolving, one of the discussions in the field, I suppose, is when does coaching become therapeutic? Not therapy necessarily, but therapeutic. And I know some folks have very clear views on that. But some of what you're referring to here invites us to be familiar with depth psychology, with the idea of things like vertical development, but also the somatic experience we have. All of which somehow invites us to broaden or deepen our coaching. I don't know, I'm going to use the word skill set. It's way more than that. So Can I pick up then on contracting and love? We are moving a little into the territory of your questioners. How do I do fierceness and compassion? How do I do this? So practically, how do you contract for love to be there in coaching?
I think my approach, when I woke up to the fact that I wasn't bringing all of me into the work, and I had to bring all of me into the work, meaning my darkness and my light, and invite the client's darkness and light. So their saboteurs, their fears, their wiser self, their deeper connection to meaning and mine too. I realized that I had to be very transparent in how I wanted to work as a coach. And so when perhaps I'm invited to do a chemistry call or a connection call, I would share a little bit about my philosophy of coaching and how it has impacted my clients and myself. And I would invite people to have an experience of what I mean by that so that they can perhaps go and explore in this different way. I recently had a chemistry call where one of the leaders did exactly this. And there is a lot of permission and slowness in the contracting that has to happen before we can get to a space where I might say, so what does that feel like in your body? Taking time, giving space, asking questions like, what if this doesn't work for you? Because that's a loving question to find out what might not work between the two of us. How will you let me know if this isn't working? Because a lot of us stay silent. You know, we have patterns of behavior that maybe are we stay silent or we get annoyed and walk away. So I want to understand how, if I perhaps step on the client's values or fears, how will they respond? So I ask questions like, what happens if I really annoy you and you want to walk away? How do we have a conversation about staying with something that might be a little bit challenging? And what about me? How, if I find the same thing, how do you want me to be in this conversation? So it's not just contracting for the logistics and processes. For me, it's about contracting for the relationship. It's about having honest, brave conversations to prepare people for the relationship we're going to have. And I need to be prepared also for the relationship we're going to have. So my client may have a totally different concept of what they want from me in this relationship. I need to find that out.
You mentioned earlier, as you began to talk about the importance of that form of contracting or that aspect, that it was also loving to do that. And there may be some people listening who think, I don't know that it's loving, it's just a good practical way of making sure that expectations are managed. Would you say more about in what ways that is a loving thing to do?
As a mentor coach, I listen into many coaches' sessions. And one of the things that really even experienced coaches skip over is the contracting stage. It's often seen as, oh, we need to get into the work.
Yeah.
And I think that is not fair to the partnership. And so if we think about it in terms of love, if we can spend a lot longer having deeper and braver conversations about what this partnership may look like and really put it in as part of the process and not just an additional thing to skip through, the foundations of the partnership just feel different. When I do it and when I haven't done it in the past, the relationship is different. And so from a perspective of love, it's coming from a place of deep connection, respect. There's an energy thing that happens when we're having brave conversations about how we want to be in this relationship that people don't even have when they're in human relationships. I'm taking it outside of the coaching here. When you're in a partnership outside of your coaching, how often do you sit down and talk about how you want to be with each other? It's rare. So for me, it's a sacred space, and that requires a loving connection to the energy of the person, deeply listening to them. We often think as coaches we deeply listen, but often we don't. We are ready with the next question or wanting to move the client somewhere. And if we can slow down, to me, that's a form of love.
I agree. And it's also making me think of two things. It's making me think, oh, this conversation is helping me attend more to my own contracting. So thank you, Marie, already. And it's making me think of what Peter Block, I think, said. I think it's arguably one of the founding fathers of OD and consulting, or certainly a grandfather figure in that world. He uses the phrase connection before content. So there's something about how, when, why might we really invest in the relational side of things, really deepening into that, spending time honouring that dimension to things before we move into content, which, yes, many of us can get to and want to get to very quickly.
It also reminds me, Helena, of John Whittington's work on systemic constellations and beginnings and endings.
Right.
And how important those beginnings and endings are, and actually how I think it's really important to contract for endings. What does the ending of this look like as well? And exploring it. How do we want to end in a way that really honours the work we've done? And again, that's a loving thing to do, because we don't want to think about endings when things are just beginning. I remember working with a leader, and he was very fast, and he had come to coaching. He'd been advised to come to coaching, and he wanted to do the coaching within 10 days. My point here is that to be a brave and loving coach in contracting, it also means knowing your boundaries. So for me to be really clear, to work with me for 10 days is not going to happen. If you want to work with me, it's a process for usually over a year. And if you want to work in 10 days, then I'm not the coach for you. It's about being, as Brené Brown says, clear and kind, knowing your boundaries. And I think that helps the client come into a space of understanding their own boundaries too.
Yes, because boundary holding for me is part of love. Holding clear boundaries, she says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind.
That's right.
So there's something about a lack of boundaries, a lack of clarity is unkind, arguably unloving, depends how much you want to link the two words.
And interestingly, that executive that came to me 5 years down the line, he's still working with me. He wanted to do it in 10 days, but he's seen the counterintuitive power of slowing down and taking his time with this brave approach to understanding himself as a leader. And he recognizes that is an ongoing process.
There's a lovely phrase I often quote from a US pastor called John Mark Comer. And he says, you can't be a loving person and a hurried person. Now, I know that's true for me. It may not be true for everybody, but I know it's true for me that when I slow down, I am much more able to connect with, access, cultivate, pick your words, the love that is available to me or the love that I have.
I'm also thinking, as you say that, though, there are times of an energy increase in the coaching, and that can involve provocation. That can also involve humor. So it doesn't always have to be slow. There can be energy ups and downs in the conversation that are really loving. So for me, I just wanted to highlight that, because sometimes I think that energy boost is also a form of love that we've got to pay attention to, and what creates the shift of that energy boost.
And of course, we can't slow down in all areas of our lives. Life is fast, life is hurried. So the work is to learn to be loving while we are hurrying. Right? It's to bring that love with us out of the quiet times into the fast.
And catch ourselves perhaps when we are moving so fast that we don't even know what we're doing. So catch ourselves and think, in this fastness, what is loving about how I'm being?
And can I bring us into a very basic question, but an important one, because there will be people listening, maybe not to this podcast series, because it's self-selecting. If you see something with love in the title, many people are drawn to it, but it's a bit like a lighthouse. Many people are turned off. So nevertheless, the question is, I think, why does love matter? If I'm coaching or doing any form of work, actually, let's widen it. Why does it matter that I do that work with love? Why can't I do great work without love coming into the picture? Surely that's possible. I wondered what you made of that.
I think on my own journey to realizing how important love was in the work I do was meaning and purpose. And Viktor Frankl, his work about life having meaning and purpose, when we're in it, comes to mind. I think if I'm doing something that is not connected to my values and my purpose in the world of work and in the world of connection, it feels like love is missing. And that may sound a very strange thing to say, but for me, I feel a lot in my body, I feel a lot in my energy, and so I notice my energy can drop when I'm feeling unfulfilled and not in meaningful work. I get a strange numbness down the left-hand side of my body. My body speaks quite loudly, often before I realize it in my mind that something's missing. And for me, it's a real indicator to stop and check and think, where am I unfulfilled? Where am I being unloving in my approach or in my own self? I don't know if that answers your question, Helen.
It does. It makes me think too, helpfully for me anyway, you often use the word loving. So there's something about it being a verb, right? And an action word, as opposed to love, which is arguably a more conceptual word. And how do we define that? But I have a sense that we all know when we're doing something that is loving and when we're doing something that is unloving.
Yeah.
And your response makes me think of bringing more love into my coaching, inverted commas, as an experiment, or bringing more love into my life as an experiment. Okay, if I do really have a sense of when I'm being loving and when I'm not, how might I experiment with choosing a loving response, whatever that might look like? And then we come to see what the benefits are. We come to see what happens in our coaching if we just try and build in 5% more of a loving mindset or a more loving approach. I don't know if I'm answering my own question either, Marie.
Yeah, well, I love that word. I use experiment a lot in my writing at the moment. Test it out. My encouragement to coaches is experiment. Don't take my word for it. Don't take anybody else's word for it, because it is a challenging concept. I have had people in my professional capacity say, you can't talk about love in coaching. I think you can. And if you, as coaches, we're told to challenge all perspectives. So let's challenge our perspective about it and experiment with it for ourselves in how it turns up for us in our work. And then also use a reflective practice to do your own research. Is this having a different impact? Is this having a different outcome? If I combine my courage with love, if I try on the mantle of a fierce loving approach, then what happens to the work and how do I know there's a shift happening?
And I have spoken with many people who say something like, look, I get it in principle, love really does matter. Thing is, what does it mean in practice? What does that mean I do or say or don't do or don't say? Can you say anything to that, Marie? If you were listening with your mentor coaching hat on, if you were listening to people coaching with love or with more loving interventions, what might that look or sound like in practice?
Often, it's funny you use the word interventions, but when I notice the coach's approach is more loving than goal-focused, there's very few tools that they use. It's much more a connected presence and almost like a gestalt approach of letting it evolve in the moment. So going nowhere, but going everywhere at the same time. So, of course, clients come with goals. So I often describe it as put the goal in the pocket in the back of your head. You know it's there. And then you can dance with a client in loving, compassionate presence, in loving challenge and provocation. And then you can take that out and say, so after all this work we've done, what are you learning about yourself or how you want to move forward? And the fiercely loving coach is able to stay within the boundaries of coaching, but have a sense, perhaps an essence of what's happening in this relational field to pay attention at a much deeper level. So they're not worried about ticking boxes or thinking about competencies. They're really looking at the magnificence of this human being in front of them and almost have a childlike curiosity about what's happening for them so that they can be the mirror instead of trying to get them anywhere. Does that make sense?
It does. And you bring in the importance of welcoming, honouring the whole person, the shadow, the warts and all, the parts of them they don't want others to see, which you mentioned right at the start, right? You said that's what brought you in. So there's something about radical acceptance of all of the person in front of you, as well as you as a coach, that contributes to a loving coaching approach.
I think so. And on this note, this is not about just liking your clients. We have clients we don't particularly like very much. But we can still bring a loving approach to our work that supports them to understand themselves if they want to in a deeper way. It doesn't mean we have to like somebody to have a loving presence with somebody. I think that's important.
Definitely now want to move to your book, Marie. Fierce Love is the working title. And you'd mentioned that as you're starting to write and think and scope things out, it's changing in front of your eyes.
Dramatically.
I'm not after chapter headings here, but nevertheless, in your thinking and exploring relating to love and coaching, what are the interesting things, the juicy things, the things that are really making your ears prick up, as it were? What are you finding really interesting in this?
The interesting thing is articulating how this translates practically. I'm a very practical coach, Helena. Ask me to show you coaching, I can show you what I mean. But the interesting thing is articulating this in words to try and make sense of something that maybe is not tangible, that I can't hold on to. That is still a fascinating process. And as the work has evolved of writing, my purpose in writing this book is to support coaches who are wondering, how can I bring more of myself into the work? How can I support my clients to bring more of themselves into the work? So it's been an interesting journey of going back to my reflective practices, as I mentioned, for the past 20 years, and understanding my own journey to the development and depth that I hope I have here. It's a never-ending process. I'm certainly not saying there's any perfection in my work. Actually, I think love is part of non-perfection. There are people that say perfection kills creativity. I think it does. So what else has been interesting is looking at the research that has been, like Eric DeHaan talks about, every coaching conversation is a move from fear towards love. I thought that was so beautiful, because that's often the case. We come in with our concerns, our challenges, and if we do this loving work in deep presence with the other person, we often move into opportunity and connection and abundance, and therefore love. And it's just such a beautiful journey. And I'm sharing case studies in my book, Helena, of how a client may have resisted that and how they've found a way to be in it. Because, of course, the work as a coach, our duty is to be, from my perspective, as fiercely loving as possible. But there's also the other side of, what does the client want and how much love do they want to bring into their own life? So the journey of the case studies has been fascinating as well.
Yes, and anyone interested in the link between fear and love, Eric DeHaan for sure. Your work, when it comes out, Robin Showett.
Yes.
There's again, theory, if you like, that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's fear. And it was one of the words you mentioned in terms of what the field of coaching was feeling like, that there's more fear. So if there's more fear, there arguably is an invitation to counterbalance that with more love, to dial up love in the face of fear.
And that brings us to our present world at the moment. There appears to be more fear. And probably there appears to be more fear because we're so connected by social media that we see so much more than we did when I was younger. But it feels like there is more fear. I have conversations with my 19-year-old daughter about the shocking things that are happening in our life only 2-3 days today. And we're having conversations about how we stay in trust with ourselves and be able to see the good in the world, but also recognize that there are things happening in the world that are not good. So how do we hold the paradox of both of those things?
Yeah, and I think it's loving to, in coaching, to create a space where people can talk about and name their fears.
Yeah.
What they're terrified of, what they're worried about. That is also loving, to say that this has a place in our conversation because it has a place in your life, in your head, so it has a place in our coaching.
Yeah.
And there's something too in what you're saying, Marie, about for the coaching client as well as the coach, for each of us, all of us, to think about what is our own relationship with love. Where did we learn about love? Who taught us? What did we absorb? And what have we now come to understand love is, which would be uniquely different for every one of us? And that is one of the tricky things, I think, about exploring love, because it means so many things to everybody.
And again, I think that having a conversation about that in the contracting is really interesting. On my intake form, when I want to get to know somebody, I ask the question, what did you learn about love? How important is love in your work, in your life? What do you find challenging about love in leadership? So that just helps set the scene for us to have an interesting conversation when it comes to having conversations about our contracting.
This is lovely, because another question I think around love in coaching is, it's a polarity thing again. To what extent do we do our coaching work with a mindset of love, a heart-based loving energy, if you like? And to what extent do we explicitly say, in part, you mentioned you have a philosophy of coaching that you share. To what extent do we explicitly say, I work with love? So you're really putting it on the table. It sounds like you work explicitly with it. Can you maybe say more about what you do in making it explicit and how people respond and react, maybe?
Yeah. I do always set up that I may ask some unusual questions. I may ask questions of you that may challenge your thinking. You have the option not to answer, especially in that intake form, because it's a clear question. What does love mean to you? So it's interesting how many people, because I'll often say when I'm meeting them after the intake questionnaire comes through, I'll say, what was that like? That was really unusual because nobody's ever asked me that question before. And if they haven't answered it, it's up to them to explore it. I'm not sure that I've had anyone not answer that question, Helena, in all the leadership work that I've done. And it always opens something interesting. Even if they might have put, I don't know what this question means, it opens up a question for exploration. So there is a setting up of, I may be asking you some questions that feel uncomfortable. Are you okay with that? And if you're not okay with a question, how will you let me know that this isn't where you want to go? I think there's something, this might be the wrong word, but it feels the right word coming up. I think sometimes we have to be a little bit naive and not overthink things, because if we overthink things, it stops us being brave. So that naivety that I might have woken up to my own self in the early days, I think it keeps me fresh in still being brave to stop thinking that this person in a suit and tie or a thobe or the national dress is going to think this is a bit weird. I want to let go of that. I want to be in a state of open naivety to think this could be a possible wonderful experience for them. So how dare I not include that?
Yes, how dare I make decisions on their behalf about what they might find valuable, pick your word. Yeah, beautiful question.
A couple of days ago, I had a call, no obligation call with a potential client, and they were looking for a career coaching. And I knew instantly that I was not the right coach and that I would recommend somebody. And they said, what type of coaching do you do? And I had the conversation about my approach to coaching is a loving approach where I'm helping you connect to love within you and the wisdom that lies within. And they were like, okay, that's a bit unusual. Is there any way you could show me what you mean? And so I said, yeah, would you be willing to experiment? And so we were able to have a beautiful 20-minute conversation, coaching conversation, where they brought a career, interestingly enough, they brought their career question. We popped it at the back of our head and we explored, and they found a word that lived inside them that brought them to tears in terms of this next move for them. And they realized that is what was missing. It wasn't the head part of their decision making. It was this deep connection to their meaning and what mattered in their life. And although I wouldn't have done career coaching, interestingly enough, I got an email this morning saying, you know that thing we did? I want more of that. So I think we have to be braver. And I think that's a loving thing. And I think that's what the world is calling from us at the moment.
Marie, in the last few minutes that we have, I'd just like to open the floor to you to say anything really that you feel you would have liked to have said and haven't had the chance to yet.
I immediately go to the coaches I'm working with that are thinking, or maybe not even working with, but maybe listening here, thinking, how do I be braver in my work? How do I connect to meaning and connection and things that really matter? How do I move from maybe following a model or a competency that doesn't fit for how I see the world. Experiment, please experiment, test it out. Invite your clients into this deeper reflection, whether it's bodywork, whether it's movement, whether it's creativity. Just experiment with things you've loved to have experienced that have lit you up, not necessarily in the coaching world. I was a former art director, so creativity is absolutely part of who I am. And I want to bring all of me in. So if you've experienced something out in the world that does not seem to relate to coaching, it might. So test it out, bring it in a loving, compassionate and courageous way, and contract for experimenting it with your clients. I think that's the biggest wish for coaches that I have.
Thank you. And when is your book out, do you think? When do you imagine we might be able to get our sticky little paws?
I'm hoping that it will be out this time next year.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. And I'm super curious as to how it will evolve further in the wrestling of it to the ground or into a book format.
Me too, Helena. It's a fiercely loving journey in itself.
So then before we head off, one last question, which is how can people reach you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Marie Quigley, and through my website, mariequigley.com, although it is under a little pause at the moment. And of course, you can email me at marie@mariequigley.com. Thank you for asking, Helena.
Thank you, Marie. I'm sure you'll have made people listening think about things, new things, and think differently about their own practice. And personally, I'm leaving with something about what's my relationship with bravery in my coaching. And I'm thinking, how explicit should I make my own coaching philosophy? How more brave could I be in saying some version of, in relation to love, this is what you get when you work with me. So some gifts for me for sure, and for others, I'm certain.
And for me, Helena, because putting this thing that we do into words help articulate it in my heart and soul as well. So really appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for listening to another podcast by the Association for Coaching. For over 20 years, our purpose has been to inspire and champion coaching excellence, to advance the coaching profession, and to make a sustainable difference to individuals, organisations, and society. To find out more about the AC and our member benefits, follow us on LinkedIn or visit our webpage at associationforcoaching.com. There you can explore our digital learning hub and enjoy our extensive library of on-demand webinars, interviews, podcasts, and a portfolio of live events featuring thought leadership, tools and models, and the latest industry trends to help you develop your coaching expertise.